Hello, everyone, and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual training session. My name is Mike. I'm the programs director for Africa Fire Mission. We're so happy that you took time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's virtual training session. Today, we're going to be talking about solar power and doing a brief overview on some solar systems. Before we get started, I just want to touch on a few administrative items. If you stick around for at least 70% of today's training, which is usually about 40 or 45 minutes, you'll receive a certificate of attendance for your training today. The screen name that you're using right now is the name that shows up on your certificate. So if you need to adjust that to what you'd like, please go ahead and take care of that now. Invite you to also stick around when we're finished. At the top of the hour, we'll switch over to tea time. Tea time is hosted by Jose Nangiri, who is Africa Fire Mission's Fire Safety Officer. And at this point in time, I'm going to pass things over to Jose, and he's going to get a
Hello, everyone.
We got you.
Sorry, I'm having a slight delay with my internet. Please apologies on that. Thank you so much, Chief Mike, for your invitation, and I truly appreciate you. And it's been a minute. I've missed quite a long, many meetings, but I'm happy. I'm back. I'm having a small cold, but we'll get through this. So this morning I got to receive a phone call from one of the firefighters, and he's a fire leader. So more like a duty officer. And he was like, you know what, Jose, I'm really having a very difficult time in my fire station because I'm getting people who are demoralized, and I'm getting people who want to be transferred from being in the fire service and concerned, because it's not the same story I've had from different people, not even 2 or 5, even up to 10 leaders. And I decided to just jot some few things on the ground, I mean on paper, and this is what I came with. And how do you increase the retention in your fire? So one of the things that I came on top of my head was increasing community outreach. We don't receive so many calls to go put out fires. So what are you going to do? Are you going to just sit in the firehouse? The answer is no. There's a lot of work to do. Get out there in your community and reach out and teach them about stop, drop, and roll, crawling under smoke, how to call the fire brigade, kitchen fires, and all those things. Keep on repeating and repeating. This is one way of retaining and motivating your firefighters. Number 2, get to have some training drills in the fire station. Monday, you can say, this week, some rope techniques. Tuesday, we're going to do ladder work. Wednesday, we're going to do lift and carries. Have some activities ongoing, even as you wait for fires to come. Number 3, have some flexibility in your firehouse. Don't have everything cast on stone, all right? Being flexible, especially when a firefighter says, hey, today I'm not going to be available. Can I switch with somebody else to take my time? Don't be cast on stone and say, yes, no, you cannot go. Have it like, yes, you can let him take over, And the last one that I got to write is have some mentorship support. Invite people to come and talk to your firemen about mental health, about how to save, about how to borrow, about how to make things work for them. Those items, when you have them in place, will motivate them. So that is what I had to talk to you about, and I hope this will help you towards having your firefighters enjoy their job. Thank you very much. Back to you, Chief Mike.
Thank you, Jose. Always appreciate you with those words and all the work that you do to help out the firefighters throughout all of Africa. At this point in time, I think we'll get started here with today's training. I said we're going to talk a little bit about solar power. And today's presentation from, let me see here. Today's presentation comes to us from a power company, a privately owned power company that provides us with some information about solar power, some different things. So we'll get into this. This is just sort of a brief overview. I don't know how much of this is going to apply to what you guys see. In some aspects, I think a lot of it's going to be the same. Some of it may be different than what you're used to seeing. So just we'll take a watch here and see what we can learn together. All right. So different technologies that are available in the solar energy systems, a couple different things that you'll find out there. Okay. Passive systems, thermal systems, photovoltaic systems. Each one has their own place. Each one has its own different components to it and things like that. A lot of what you guys will be seeing are some of the more passive units are very common that do things like water heating and things like that. That's a technology that we have here, but we don't find too often. But I see a lot of while we're working there in Africa. First, that's the first system that we're going to talk about here. These solar thermal present some concerns to us, but the concerns do not come from electricity. Okay. These do not produce electricity, they produce hot water. So essentially, they're just capturing that radiant heat energy from the sun, warming up that water. And you're going to have two different parts. You're going to have some sort of a solar collector and then a storage tank. There may be a pumping station that will circulate that water. Couple different ways that they work. Some of them directly heat the water that's going to be consumed. Others use a heat transfer fluid in the solar collector and then use that to pass that heat energy on to the water. These are typically found roof mounted, and that's really where it poses a danger to us as emergency responders. Of course, if we're placing these heavy water-filled pipes at an elevated location on a roof or something like that, if the building is being consumed by fire, we've got to be concerned about that extra weight that's being stored on that roofing system. So we've got to be cautious if we're working underneath of these things for the potential for collapse. So the danger here is more that heavy weight, that collapse potential, not any kind of production of electric energy that we typically think of with solar systems. Next type here is the solar photovoltaic. And this is what we're going to spend most of our time on here. So this is the system that collects the sunlight, converts it into electrical energy that transferred back into the electrical grid. And all those different types of systems sort of present their own hazards and dangers as well. Like I said, this comes from a utility company, and this is just to give us a little bit of awareness as to what's going on, so we can make some decisions when we get these units involved in fire. What should we be careful of? What precautions may we need to take? We talked a little bit about some of the different applications here, and we'll go over some of those considerations when you get on the scene. What do you need to think about? What are you taking a look at? Some things about, how we work safely around these systems. And then when we're done with that, we'll talk a little bit about some of the newer technology that's coming along. There is a section here that talks about building codes. I'm not sure that that's going to be all that relevant to us. So we'll see how we're doing on time when we get there. So those photovoltaic systems, some different configurations that we might see. These are grid-tied systems that tie into the electrical system. So here we've got, an example of a roof-mounted system. There's an inverter in there. These solar systems produce direct current, DC current, right? The power that we get from the utility company is alternating current or AC power. So there needs to be an inverter that converts that DC direct current power into AC current to be used in the home. For us here, these are sort of the most common systems. Everything is located behind the meter, the electric meter being the location where the power comes in from the utility company. There's a service meter that measures usage, and then all of our equipment's on the other side of that. Okay, commonly used in residential settings. The different components that are in here, we talked about the AC and the DC. So over here on the left-hand side, we're starting out with the panels. We have the different panels all interlinked together, coming into a combiner box where they bring all that power together and then move that to a disconnect. The disconnect is something that we always want to be looking for when we encounter these systems, that we find out where that disconnect is so that we can do that. It moves from the disconnect into the inverter. The inverter switches our power from direct current to AC, alternating current. Then it goes to our utility breaker panel, which would be inside the building, and can be used for the household usage, the residential usage through that breaker panel. Of course, it can also travel to the utility meter, back out into the grid as well. Okay. I see some, looks like we've got some folks that are pretty knowledgeable about solar equipment here. Some comments. Yep, some of these systems have the inverters embedded directly into the panels to make them quicker and easier to use. Yep. These inverters, the way this system is set up, if the power coming from the utility company coming into the home stops working, this inverter continues to work so that you continue to have power there. So something to think about is that even if there's no power coming from the utility company, you could still be getting current produced through the system, pushing back to the grid, back feeding the grid. Somebody's mentioning in the comments that back feed into the grid is a danger to the people that work for the utility company. It can be a danger for us as first responders. And then that direct current, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but that direct current is much more dangerous to us than alternating current is. Okay. This is a little bit bigger system. They call this a wholesale system. So this system here is designed it's not connected to the building's electric system. So these types of systems are used to collect that solar energy, convert it to electricity using similar components just on a larger scale. And then that power gets fed back directly into the grid. So the building itself that these are mounted on may not be consuming that energy. They're just selling that energy back to the utility company. That's how it works here. It may be different in other countries. But if your building or your solar system produces more power than you can use, the excess power gets fed back into the grid. That's metered as well, and you get credit on your utility bill. So essentially, you're selling that power back to the utility company. Some pictures of some of these components for these wholesale, these large systems. You've got, your arrays mounted up on the roof. You've got lots of conduit that feed down, so our electricity is being captured here in the solar panels. It's being fed down through conduit systems into these bigger inverters, and then through these inverters, it's getting fed back into the power system through some sort of a connection here. This particular one, it's feeding into an underground system, right? Now you could also have a hybrid system. So this is an illustration. So here you've got your wholesale system like we talked about before. It's in the back half of this illustration. So it's just generating solar power from the rooftop of the building, feeding that directly into the power grid. But in the front half of the system, you've got a set of panels there that are collecting the energy into a distribution box, down to an inverter system, through your utility, through your meter box or your breaker box. So in that particular system, it's got a separate system that's selling the energy to the utility company, and then another system that's being used for use in that building as it's being produced as well. Okay. So in this case, for us, we've got to recognize that there's two different systems. We've got to be able, that means there's two different disconnects. So we just have to keep that in mind, evaluate what the types of systems that we have are, and be sure that we're addressing all of them if there's a fire or some other type of emergency. Couple of different terminology that they use here, and you can see as things start to build together into the system, the danger begins to grow, right? So here you've got your individual solar cells. A cell is the individual, small cell that's collecting that energy. You put a bunch of those cells together into a module. So you've got a module or a panel. Okay, there it's showing in this particular example, this panel or this module produces 40 volts of direct current and about 8 amps. Okay, when you start to string those together, you can see in the direction of flow, it's flowing from the right to the left. So you've got that 40-volt panel, but by the time we get to the end of that string, it's producing up to 200 volts. Okay, so we've gone from 40 volts in a single panel. Now, as they're strung together, maybe 200. Down in the bottom, then we take a couple of those strings and we connect those strings together. Now we're up to 400 volts of direct current, about 24 amps. That's high voltage and high current. So single panel, not too bad, or module. As we start to string them together and build that whole array, we're getting into that area where we've got some deadly voltage or deadly current that we have to be concerned about. Different types of panels that are out there. These are some crystalline modules. This is sort of the most common technology that we're seeing right now. They've got some tempered glass on the outside. They've got aluminum frames. Lifespan on these things, that's always a big question as people are installing them. What's the lifespan on these things? Typically, they're built with a design to last about 20 to 25 years. That doesn't mean that they're going to stop working when they reach that point in their lifetime, but that's what the plan is for. So when they're calculating systems and systems efficiency, things like that, that's what they're looking at those time frames of will it produce the necessary power to make it worthwhile over that 20 to 25 year period. And I think it's it's common sense, right? Size dictates output. So tiny little solar panels not going to have too terribly much output. We get these big arrays that cover an entire rooftop, or we'll see some examples of some bigger, ground mounted arrays that can really produce large amounts of power. Another type, newer technology, is called a thin film. Okay, it's this very thin, flexible film. You can see some of these. These aren't as efficient as the other systems. To produce a big system with these, it typically is more expensive than the crystalline system that we were looking at to begin with. These are a little bit less expensive for them to produce, but because they're less efficient, you need much more of them. Little bit different technology being used here. Sometimes you'll see this particular technology, some of these thin films are used on a small consumer level for, little folding panels or little solar panels that you could roll up and use to charge small items like cell phones or small batteries. Okay, but they also, as you can see, they also use these to make larger systems as well. Here's just some examples of different systems installed in residential settings. How they're laid out on the roofs, whether they're the thin film, whatever the different models. Just something to look out for. Of course, we're looking as we're doing our evaluation of the building as we arrive for the incident, or while we're doing a pre-plan, while we're out and we're observing these things, we're just making note of where these things are, what type of system. Of course, the thin film systems, they aren't going to weigh as much as the other crystalline modules, right? So they're not going to be as great a concern with the weight of them like some of the other systems may be. So just things that we're going to think about, keep in mind as we're looking at the building, how it may impact things. Here's a commercial system, just a couple of different ways here. Here they're sort of wrapping them around these tubes and reflecting the light off of them to try to gather both direct sunlight and diffuse sunlight, reflected light. So they're trying to really gain a lot more efficiency with this system. They're using that round system, so they're increasing the amount of surface area that they can use than just a flat lay. So just a little bit different style there as well. Maybe you've seen something like this. Maybe you haven't yet. Okay, more examples of these systems there. You can see in the top picture where they're rolling out some of these panels. Okay, just a bunch of different integrated systems. Okay, just some examples of what they look like. More of our system components as they're mounting these things. What's involved? Okay, these things aren't just sitting there up on the roof. They've got different mounting systems. The more complex the mounting systems are, the more those factors play into our emergency responses, right? So there's different styles of mounting bolts. You've got to have some mounting bolts and then some sort of a track system to mount those panels. This allows for easy replacement of the panels if something goes wrong or if a panel's damaged or something like that. But as we look at that, that's added weight that's being added to the roofing system. So you've got the weight of the solar components themselves. Then you need to factor in, there's going to be the weight of these grid systems. They're going to be punctured through the roof. Okay, so if they were improperly installed, if you look at this this picture here in the top, you can see they've used some roofing tar between the mounting bolt and the roof surface to try to seal water out from getting inside. If the little details like that aren't done, it's a poor installation where you can get moisture coming through those holes where they're mounted in the ceiling, in the roofing system. That can degrade the strength of that roofing system and cause problems as well. So just something to think about when you're looking at these different systems, components. Of course, they're not all going to look exactly like this. In your country, they may look a little bit different, but they should all have some labels on them somewhere. Up top here, we've got our combiner box. This is where you're going to be bringing in the different feeds from the different panel systems, the strings to form your array. So that's where you're bringing all of your wires in, moving all of your power through that into your direct current disconnect. There's going to be some sort of a switch or some sort of a manual disconnect that you pull out and remove, that's physically breaking the connection between those wires so that we're not feeding system in. That's one of those big components that we're always looking for, are those disconnects. If you're in doubt as to whether you need to disconnect it, the safe answer is to just go ahead and throw those disconnects and cut those power systems off. Inverter boxes, of course, they can come in different shapes, different sizes as well. And then once they go through the inverter box, right, we've switched from direct current to alternating current. There's a disconnect for your alternating current as well. Your breaker box that you've seen, your electric panel, there's going to be a main disconnect where you can shut the power off going into the building. So maybe you don't need to shut down the solar system, you just need to shut down the power within the building. There's where you can do that without disabling the whole system. And then there's typically some type of a meter that is, in this particular example, right, it's a bidirectional meter, which means it's reading how much energy is being consumed as it flows into the main panel here, and also how much energy is flowing back out through it to the electrical grid. So that's how they're determining how much energy you're selling back to the utility company. Here's showing you some pictures of some different systems, some different ways that they're mounted in the larger commercial systems. These are ballasted systems. Some of these commercial systems, these ballasted systems, this is extra additional weight that's placed on to hold these systems down as they set them on the roof, and then they use a ballasted system where they're using weight to hold those down. That causes us more issues, right? More weight being added to that roof. So was there some sort of building code? Is the roof designed to hold those kind of heavy loads? That can factor into the types of responses we have if the building is on fire, if the building has a collapse system or something like that. Good comment in the comments. I see somebody's also saying, different animals, right, can get in underneath of these panels, use them as homes, chew through system wires, present shorts and things. Christopher, great point. There are plenty of hiding spaces for birds and other critters to get in there and cause us problems. Just another thing to think about when you're doing if you're doing a building safety inspection, they've got one of these systems, looking for evidence of those things as well. Commercial louvered system. These have the louvers. These are just it wraps some metal around the back side of these things so that they're not impacted by the wind. In windy areas, we're concerned about this wind coming through and lifting those panels up. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're looking at those different styles. There's going to be hidden void spaces in behind there. Okay, so some places these are required, sometimes they're not. So that's what those, if it's enclosed, that's the idea behind that. Interlocking solar tiles. These systems are placed up on the roof. They're connected These are good for commercial systems because the roof membrane isn't penetrated, right? On a flat roof, typically there's some sort of a rubber sealing membrane to keep water leaks out from the roofing system. These interlocking systems all interlock together to make one sort of heavy layer that sits on there. I didn't do the conversion for you there, but weight-wise, it's saying 6 pounds per square foot. So, an area this big weighs 6 pounds. That can put some significant weight on the roofing system. Thin film. This was the system we looked at a little bit earlier here. They're just using an adhesive to attach it. So this system isn't puncturing the roof either, but it's glued down. The advantage to this system, the last system weighed about 6 pounds per square foot. This system here only weighs a pound a square foot, right? So much lighter weight. So it has its own advantages and disadvantages. In your commercial systems, they're going to look a little bit different. You can see here on this big system, they've got 2 different disconnects. On the left-hand side is your DC disconnect. On your right-hand side is your AC disconnect, which tells us, in the center of this, what's probably going on in the center here is our inverter, where we're switching that DC current into AC current. A lot of times, if these things are installed properly and labeled properly, there'll be some warnings on here that'll tell you what to do, which switches to throw to shut down the system. So check those out if you see a solar system being installed. This is where you want to take a look at these systems beforehand, right? Take a look at some of these disconnects and things before there's an incident at the area, right? Begin to familiarize yourselves with what does it say about how they disconnect? How can we sort of pre-plan a little bit? If something goes wrong in this building, do we know which levers to throw? Do we know how to find them? Here's a big rooftop system. Okay, multiple inverters. Just think about the weight of these systems, right? Look at all this equipment that's being placed up there on the roofing system. Again, my biggest concern with this, outside of the electrical hazard that it presents to us, is all that weight. I don't want to be operating underneath that weight if the roofing system's getting compromised by fire. Got to be very cautious about that. This particular system, a little bit more complicated for us as an emergency responder. These have a bunch of small little inverters as opposed to those big inverters that we saw in the previous picture. The downside to this, look, each one of them has its own disconnect, right? So if we're trying to quickly shut down this system, we've got a lot of work to do, right? You've got to go through and throw those. And just looking at this picture, look at what's going on here. Most of these are on, but a couple of these are already shut off for some reason. Something to be aware of as these more complicated systems. This is a system similar to what somebody I think was mentioning earlier in the comments here. These have the little micro inverters that are right there in the photovoltaic module, right? So you've got your module with your inverter right there as one sort of single component, all coming together and then coming in, right? So a couple different systems there. Again, if you see one of these systems being installed, there's the time to look at how it's being installed, ask your questions before there's some sort of emergency at the location. More components here inside. This is up top here. We're looking at the inside of one of these combiner boxes where they're bringing all those in. So here you can see, the bottom picture with the lid closed. You've got your conduit bringing your wiring and your power from the panels into these combiner boxes, which are then feeding them as a higher voltage, more direct current flowing, heading to the next part of the system, which would be the inverter. A rooftop disconnect. Okay, so you can see a lot of these disconnects all have a similar look to them, so we're going to be looking out for those. Hopefully there's lots of signage like this, these danger high voltage. Okay. Each system may be connected differently. So that's why we're showing you all of these different ways. There could be disconnects at each one of these, or you've really got to look and trace from the panel to the utility meter to see exactly what's going on. Where are we using it? You know, a couple different applications. Here in the US, residential use is getting more popular, so people are covering their rooftops with these panels. On a large home that's got their south-facing, for us here in the Northern Hemisphere, south-facing roof covered with panels, these systems can generate enough power to power the whole home and some excess to feed back into the grid. So here in this particular example, you know, you can sort of barely see the panels are attached up here on the top of the roofing system. And then on the side of the building, we've got a lot of different wires and things going on. So you've got to visually trace these back to the different components to figure out what exactly is going on. This round meter here, this is our utility meter. This one, of course, will be a bi-directional. It'll measure power in and out. And then this wire up here is feeding into the meter from the utility company. Here's our, here we get either 120 or 240 volt service coming in. Here in the US, we step down all of our household current down to 120 volts. Most of you all are used to that being 240 volts. Okay, here's your power coming in from the utility company, dropping down to your meter and then into the home. Here you've got your panels up top, your wires coming in, your DC conductors coming into a junction box. They're feeding down here to your disconnect. And then in this particular situation, shown that the inverter actually is in the basement. Okay, so within the home, where that inverter is that's converting from our DC to our AC power. Commercial applications, same as residential, really. To think about, they're not always just roof mounted. So here there's some on the, you know, on the face of the buildings, on the vertical sides of the buildings. There's solar canopies. I think there's a better picture in another slide or two of some of these solar canopies. You can also have these ground mounted solar arrays, right? I've seen a lot of these in a couple of different countries that we work in there. The good thing about these facilities, these big ground mounted solar ones, there's really not a lot that can go wrong from our perspective as an emergency responder. So typically we don't have to worry too much about this. There's not a lot of combustible materials there in the panels and systems. So those ground mounted ones don't typically cause us much of an issue. Here's one of these canopy systems. They're starting to install these over top of parking lots, right? And that kind of makes a lot of sense. Gives you a place to park the vehicles in the shade where it's cooler. You're collecting that energy off the parking lot. So these are growing in popularity as well. For us here in the US, some of these ground-mounted systems like this, they're doing a raised array kind of like this in the ground-mounted system, and they're grazing animals underneath of it. So they're combining agriculture, they're combining that solar farming and raising livestock underneath of the panels. So just an interesting way they do some things. bunch of different resources that were used to put together this this particular presentation. Now we're going to transition for these last 15 minutes. We're going to talk about how these things impact, what kind of concerns do we have as a firefighter, right? The big danger here is the exposure to the current, right? How much voltage, we could be exposed to, and, upwards of 1,000 volts are going to be possible with very large systems. Some of these smaller systems, there's still that low voltage can cause the shock injuries and fall injuries, especially because these are roof mounted. If you receive electric shock while you're working on the roof, that can lead to a fall injury. So something to be careful about. Here we're looking at the dangers of electrocution and the physical or the physiological effects that electricity has on our body. And from DC current, right? If we get 0 to 2 milliamps of power is generally considered safe. We may not necessarily even know. To about 40 milliamps, you can perceive that direct current going through you. Above 40 amps, between 40 and 240 milliamps, it says lock on. So what that means is if you were to touch that current, under the perception, if you were to put your hand on something that had that amount of current going through it, you would feel it. You would feel a tingling sensation, but you could remove your hand easily from it. In that 40 to 240 direct current milliamps, it says lock on. If you touch that, the current is going to be enough to cause disrupt the electrical impulses to your muscles, and it's going to cause your hand to clamp on. It will cause your hand to close and grip that, and you won't be able to open that back up, right? If we're exposed to more than 240 milliamps, that's the electrocution threshold for DC current. For AC, it's different. You can see the numbers down here, 0.5 milliamp, up to 6 to 105 and greater than 105. So those are the different thresholds compared to direct current versus alternating current. How does this occur? How do we get shocked? There's a little bit of math in here. I'll place this presentation in our Google Drive folder. I'll put a link to that in the chat. I'll drop that in there right now, so you guys can find this later on. If you go to this link, there'll be a folder that says additional materials. I'll drop this in here where you can get access to this presentation and take a look at this a little bit later. But basically, the seriousness of an electric shock increases as the current increases through the body. So basically what's happening is electrical current is passing through your body. You're completing that electrical circuit, that it's traveling through you. The more current that travels through you, the more danger, the more harm it's going to do to your body, right? In the bottom of here, it talks about an analogy. Of course, it's using imperial units of gallons per minute, but you get the idea. We could even call it liters per minute, right? If you've got a high pressure hose line that's flowing 30 gallons a minute or 30 liters per minute versus a low pressure line, which one is going to hurt you more, right? The high pressure at 30 gallons a minute is going to hurt you more than a low pressure line at 30 gallons a minute if you're getting sprayed with it, right? So in that example, you're using that higher operating pressure to overcome friction loss in the hose to maintain that flow that you want. With electricity, they're doing that similar. The higher voltage that they're flowing more easily overcomes the resistance of that electricity traveling through your body. So that's what increases the shock risk, okay? I don't know if you guys have any of these tools. We have these available to us here in the US. We call it like a hot stick. It's a tool that detects alternating current, makes a beeping sound. So if there's wires down or something like that, we can wave this thing around and it'll let us know if there's alternating current. That does not work for direct. The tools won't detect that direct current. So just if you have one of those tools, just know that won't let you know if you're dealing with direct current. Okay. Just here looking at how much these panels produce. Essentially, I'm getting a little short on time here, so let me just sort of simplify this a little bit. That on a bright sunny day, right, when the sun is out, obviously we're producing a lot more power. Here, it's using a unit of kilowatt hours. Saying on a sunny day, we're producing 1160 kilowatt hours when the sun's out. When it's cloudy, okay, or overcast, it loses a bunch of efficiency, right? So in this particular example, it's saying, okay, on a cloudy day, maybe it's only putting out 144 kilowatt hours as compared to the 1160 kilowatt hours, right? So producing significantly less power, but the point is it's still producing power. Even though it's cloudy or overcast, it's still capable of producing power. You've got to be cautious of that, right? On a rainy day, okay, so lots of clouds, it's raining during the rainy season, right? Saying you could see up to a 90% reduction, but still producing energy, okay? And then some of the things that I found a little bit interesting, the scene lighting that you might use at an incident or street lighting or something like that. Those lights, casting light onto those solar panels can cause them to produce energy as well. Okay. So just something to think about is that any source of light that's hitting these panels, be it full sun, on even the little bit of sun peeking through the clouds on a cloudy day, the light that you still got when it's raining, or even lights from scene lighting or something like that, can cause it to produce power. So these things, if light is touching the panel in any way, any amount of light, it's producing some energy that we have to be careful about. This next example shows you if you have if the fire is casting light onto these solar panels, right? That's going to cause these solar panels to produce energy as well, right? And in looking at this particular one, right, it's showing you that with a fire 75 feet away from the solar panel, it's still producing enough milliamps of energy that could cause your muscles to contract and lock on if you come in contact to that power. Okay, so just something you may have never even thought about, right? A fire in the building next door could be powering those solar panels at night, right? Where are the risks? What are the risks? Any place where there's wiring, okay? As we're working, any place there's wiring poses a danger to us, a danger if we cut through that wire, if there's a short, something like that. System components, like the mounting brackets and things like that, all different places we're going to be cautious about. Some of these places where there's voltage present, they should be labeled right, but these labels get faded in the sunshine and things like that. Be cautious at some of these disconnect boxes. There may be power present on both sides of the disconnect. Okay, so trace the system, as that's why we spent some time talking about how the electricity travels through the systems, right? Using some type of a tool. Obviously, if we cut through a wire with some sort of a tool, that's exposing us directly to an electric shock hazard. Depending on where it is within the system, it depends on how powerful that shock may be. Then if we're working on the roof and we're, again, exposed to that electrical shock, could that lead to expecting to receive that shock? Will that get you off balance, cause you to fall off of that roof? Okay. So be cautious whenever we're cutting around these things. Tools may become energized. Are all of the cutting tools that you use, are they all electrically insulated? They may not be. So just be very cautious of that when we're operating around it. Here, this particular picture, shows just a simple axe, and you can see the sort of burn mark, right, and a little bit of metal missing from that axe blade from chopping into a charged electrical line. Damage to the cells themselves, to the modules, can cause some shorts within those panels. Those shorts can cause an arc. Of course, when you get arcing, then you have the possibility of open flames and fire ignition. So punctures or damage to these panels that may be caused. Of course, we're not going to step on these panels. I think we talk about that a little bit more. Arcing, causing open flames and that sort of thing. Here it's just showing you as well, if flames damage those panels. In this picture, it's showing a fire damaged panel, and they're hooking a testing meter up to it, and it's showing that there's still energy traveling through the wiring on panels that were exposed to fire, right? So if you look at this here, right, these panels that are still intact are still producing electricity. Some of the electricity they're producing may even be coming from the fire that's damaging the other panels, right? As long as those wires aren't completely compromised, there could still be power flowing through those fire damaged panels, okay? Here it's talking about hose streams and the shock hazard through a hose stream. Typically what this is showing is that it's not a whole lot of danger. It's showing that with your fog streams, your adjustable nozzles, the different types of streams that you may have, your different amounts of DC voltage, it's typically showing that this isn't a whole lot of a concern, that you're going to get shocked through the hose line. Okay. With the smooth bore nozzle, just doing a straight stream of water, this is showing that straight stream is going to conduct that electricity a little bit better. So in more cases than with the adjustable nozzle, here the adjustable nozzle, most of it's just that safe, barely perceptible, only when using the solid stream of the adjustable nozzle. So it makes sense with this smooth bore nozzle, right? That we've got a little bit more risk, but still, this is only in that perceptible range, not the lock-on, not the electrocution range. Okay, applying Class A foam. Class A foam, not really much of a concern either there. Roof operations, look, just be cautious when you're operating on a roof with these. Be careful that you're not dropping anything on the panels. Don't walk on the panels. Be careful that you don't trip over the wiring. Pretty common sense stuff, right? Avoid these panels, avoid the systems at all costs. If you have to work around it, be careful. Will your PPE protect you? To some extent. What this is saying is that if you're wearing your proper PPE, it's dry, it can be of some value with inadvertent contact, okay? That means you're not intentionally trying to grab these things, right? So will this protect you from shocks where you're trying to intentionally make contact with these systems? No, but you may get enough protection that a quick inadvertent contact, an accidental contact that you might be exposed to while you're operating, your PPE does have some value in protecting you. Okay. I know this when these things burn, right? There's all these different films and different materials within these things. Here's the different components of what they're made up of. The idea behind this slide is that when these things are on fire, they're putting out nasty chemicals into the air, and you don't want to breathe these nasty chemicals. Wear breathing apparatus if it's available. If it's not available, right, we're going to use common sense. We're going to stay out of that smoke as best we can. We're going to position ourselves so we're upwind, so that we're not getting that stuff's not being blown into us, right? So we're trying to avoid breathing this stuff. Something that I talked about over and over again in the first part when we're talking about the system components, just beware of all of this weight, right? System weight, you've got these roofing panels, you've got this roof mounted solar system, it's on fire. If we're putting water onto that roof yet, we're adding even more weight. There's a potential for collapse, right? All this additional weight. So be cautious operating underneath of these things. Tactical considerations, we'll wrap up here with just a couple more minutes. What are we going to do sort of tactically to do this? First thing we do is identify the system, right? Left-handed side of the system. On the left side, this is our photovoltaic system that's producing energy. This system on the right-hand side is a passive system for hot water. So we identify those. Electrical concerns, be careful here. No electric on the right-hand side. We're just worried about additional weight. Some of these buildings, you may not be able to see them. Okay, if it's a flat mounted system on a flat roof, you may not be able to see that it has those systems. So be cautious of that. Look for some of those system components mounted to the sides of the buildings or something like that. If we're going to start working on this building, if this building's exposed to fire, get to the disconnects, shut the disconnects off. Shut off the power at the inverters, any disconnects that you may find, shut off power at the main electrical panel, shut them all down. Typically here we have a requirement, we call it lockout, tag out, where you'll physically throw the switch, and then there's some sort of a place on there where you can place a lock, or you can place something on there to prevent it from being turned back on, and you're placing a tag on it that says that it's been tagged out for safety. If you don't have that kind of stuff available to you, is there somebody that you can keep nearby so nobody goes back and messes with those? Figure out a way that you can ensure that once you shut those things off, they stay off. Be careful. Pulling a electric meter seems like a simple thing, that you just grab a hold of that meter, twist and pull, but that can be very dangerous. This picture on the right-hand side shows where an electric meter was improperly pulled. You had a large arc. That can be really dangerous. So that pulling an electric meter serves as a disconnect because it physically disconnects the systems, but that's not something that you should attempt to do. Okay, that's something where you should get the utility company to come and do that for you. Okay. This slide here is just sort of showing you the general considerations, right? We've talked about all of these. Potential shock hazards, the hazardous atmosphere from the burning materials of them, the system weight if it's going to collapse. We've got to be careful with our ladder placement. We don't want to place our ladders near or on these systems. They present trip and fall hazards, arcene lights or other lighting, or the fire itself could activate the system to cause it to produce energy. So we've got to think about that. Maybe we need to alter our tactics. But look at what it's got sort of underlined here, right? The existence of a photovoltaic system will not necessarily prevent offensive tactics. The system may have no impact on the fire whatsoever. Okay, so sort of generally speaking, we're keeping all of these things that we talked about in the back of our mind as various hazards that we could be exposed to. In the big picture, does this impact our fire operations? No. There's extra weight we have to be worried about. That extra weight could come from other systems, refrigeration systems and things like that mounted on the roof. So in general, right, we be aware of these extra hazards that are in place. We still go about our suppression job the way we always would. Okay. This one here, if you're talking, systems, just be careful with the systems. Of course, the systems are energized when the systems directly are involved with power. You don't want to come in contact with those system components. Just be aware of the arcing. We talked about the hose stream risks. They're there. They're not super dangerous, but we'll just keep those in mind, right? Overhaul, this is where we maybe could run into more issues than actually fighting the fire. Once the system is damaged, the fire's out, we still have to be cautious. Intact panels can still generate electricity. We still have to check those system components, make sure those system components, those disconnects didn't fail, didn't melt, didn't somehow reconnect. Okay, so lots of things to think about. Be extra cautious after the fire's out, what we're doing work and what we're touching and things like that. We talked about all this. UL is an organization here in the US that does a lot of testing and things, that has a lot of data about these photovoltaic systems and things like that. Did lots of testing to bring us some of the science that comes along with this. Okay. Another hazard here, somebody mentioned earlier in the chat, right? Stuff can collect underneath of these systems, debris, vegetation, animal nests, whatever. They can collect under there, being exposed to heat, and then the last thing I think we want to talk about here, a strategy to think about if you've got access to tarps, salvage covers, and things like that. Covering those panels is also a way to prevent them from producing energy. But even that, depending on the type of cover that's okay, so even covering them, if you had access to enough tarps and things like that, not sure how effective that may be. Okay. I think that kind of covers things. We talked a lot about what the system components were, things like that. I'm up against our time for sort of the formal portion of our training here. So let me stop my screen share for a minute. Thank you all for coming and attending today's lesson. I'm going to post the slideshow in that Google Drive that I posted earlier there, so you guys can have access to this. You'll get this video be up on YouTube and all those things. So I'll be sure to check those out if you want to see any of this again, or pause it so you can read those screens. So thank you all for coming. We got plenty of seats here. Invite your friends, invite your colleagues, and we'll see you all again next week.